All right, here we go. We are going to talk about 7.2, the converse of the Pythagorean theorem. Yesterday, what we talked about was that if you had a right triangle, then you had a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That is your Pythagorean theorem. However, today we're going to talk about if you have a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then you have a right triangle. So we're going to try to prove that side lengths create the right triangle, among other things, okay? So, if you take a look at our picture right now, what we're looking at here, you have side lengths of 5, 5, and 8. Okay, if I was going to set this into a Pythagorean theorem situation, so a squared plus b squared equals c squared, if I wasn't given a and b and C, how would I know which order to put it in? Yeah, you need to make sure that your longest side, in this case the 8, is your C squared, and the other two are your legs. Okay, so simple. Now here's the thing. Before we even do that, we need to kind of go back and review a little bit and make sure that we know that this is a triangle. How do we know if three numbers can create a triangle? If you remember back when we learned about this, we said that in order to have a triangle, 5 plus 5 had to be greater than 8, right? And then we also, which it is, because it is 10 is greater than 8. We also said that 5 plus 8 had to be greater than 5, which we know is 13 is greater than 5. And because these two numbers are the same, we don't have to do it a third time. But if there's a third number, we'd have to make that combination. So if you remember how to determine if it's a triangle at all, that also helps. So be careful. That could be an easy trick question. And, if you forget that part of it and you just jump right into determining if it's a right, triangle, obtuse, or acute, you need to make sure that it can be a triangle at all. Okay? So with that being said, we know that this does create a triangle, so let's go ahead and see if it is a right triangle. So what I would do is simply put in there 5 squared plus 5 squared is equal to c squared. Okay, so 5 squared is 25 plus 25 is equal to 8 squared. Well, I now know this is 50 does not equal 64. So this is not a right triangle, okay? In order for this to have been a right triangle, I would have had to make these equal each other, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about that in just a minute as we move forward, because this right here, the 50 doesn't equal 64, that is going to tell us something that we're going to talk about right now. Or I'm sorry, we're going to talk about in a minute. Okay? So let's look at this one. What about 10, 11, and 14? Does that make a right triangle? First thing we want to do is take our smallest ones, 10 plus 11. Is that greater than 14? Well, sure. 10 plus 11 is 21, is greater than 14. And if you get your two smallest ones, you know the other ones are going to work out. So you're going to be in good shape there. Okay, so let's go ahead and check this. Let's plug it in. 10 plus 11, 10 squared, plus 11 squared equals 14 squared. Okay, so 10 squared is 100, plus 11 squared is 121. Does that equal 14 squared, which is 196? Well, you're going to easily figure out that 221 does not equal 196. So now we've got two examples of things that do not make a right triangle. So what is this telling us? If this doesn't make a right triangle, it's got to be significant some way, right? What other types of triangles have we dealt with when we're classifying triangles? That's right, we've dealt with right triangles, acute triangles, and obtuse angles. So let's look here. If we have a right triangle, we already know Pythagorean theorem applies. If we have an acute triangle, your c squared will be less than your a squared plus your b squared. If you have an obtuse triangle, you're going to have a c squared that's greater than your a squared plus b squared. So let's go back for just a second. If you look here, here's my a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? Well, 221 is greater than 196. So what does that mean to us? Well, here our a squared and our b squared is greater than our c squared. That means that this triangle right here is representing an acute triangle. What about our first example? In this case here, our a squared plus b squared is less than 64. So that c squared is greater than the a squared plus b squared. What does that mean? C squared is greater. That's right here. So we know then that that triangle is obtuse. So we can learn a lot from three numbers. As long as they make a triangle, we can determine what kind of triangle they make based on putting it into a Pythagorean theorem type set. Okay? So let's practice that. What triangle does 2 square roots of 3, and 4 make? Okay, well, the first thing we want to do, because if they're not in order, we need to make sure we put them in order. So we need to make sure we find the right a squared plus, let me get that better, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's the first thing we need to do. Okay? I clearly know that 2 is not greater than 4, so 2 is clearly going to be one of the legs. But what about 2 square roots of 3? Well, an easy way to check that would be simply put it into your calculator. Okay, so I could put it into my calculator, 2 times the square root of 3, using your calculator, and you'll figure out that it is 3.4. Okay, or 3.5, 3.46 or 3.5. So now you know that's smaller than 4. So I'm just going to go ahead and put 2 squared plus 2 square roots of 3 squared, you got to square the whole thing, is equal to 4 squared. Now, 2 squared is easy, right? It's 4. 4 squared is easy, 16. How do we do then 2 square roots of 3 squared? Well, if you remember your exponent laws, you're going to take the 2 here and also here. So you're going to have now essentially 2 squared times the square root of 3 squared. Well, that's pretty simple. So here you have 4. Now what happens to a square root that is being squared? Yeah, it just simply cancels, right? And so that leaves you with 3. So then you end up with 4 times 3 is 12. So you go back over here to your problem and you have 4 plus 12, okay? And then you end up with 16 equals 16. And so that means that what kind of triangle do we have now? Based on this, what kind of triangle do we have? Okay, that's a right triangle. Okay, let's look at the next one. I'm going to erase this so I have a little room to work. This one's a little bit easier simply because, you're going to have to use your calculator primarily, but it is easier because you already know what sides are larger and smaller. You need to make sure you put them in order because they put this 12.2 in the middle to kind of throw you off. So you can go ahead and put 8.2 squared plus 4.1 squared equals 12.2 squared, right? So if you put that into your calculator, you have 8.2 squared is 67.24 plus 4.1 squared is 16.81 equals 12.2 squared is 148.84. So go ahead and add 67.24 plus 16.81, and you end up with 84.05 is less than 148.84, right? So in this case, this is my, and again, we need to make sure that I see this correctly. This is my a squared plus b squared is less than my c squared. Go back to your little thing that you need to memorize. C squared is greater, okay? So if c squared is greater, c squared here is greater, right? We have an obtuse triangle. Okay? As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them down. Come see me in tutoring. Ask me for help. And that's pretty much the gist of it. There's not a whole lot more to it. Obviously, you'll have some trickier, harder questions. Other than that, that's it. If you have any questions, come see me. Have a great day.